In a fairly recent Club Outside Q&A post, Kubo was asked whether or not Neutra ended up in hell. And in fairly typical Kubo fashion, he refused to answer. So, is the fifth Espada in hell, or isn't he? Well, it got me thinking actually, who should we be expecting to see in hell? Who's down there? If the elusive hell arc ever does materialise, which long-lost characters are most likely to make a reappearance? Almost 4 years ago now, back in 2021, in the direct aftermath of the Hell chapter's release, we made a video like this, looking at 10 characters that I thought could realistically appear. But what's interesting is that, although we've had next to no updates on the Hell chapter in that time, so to speak, well, we do actually know a lot more now. For example, in that old video, I said that collectively, we could see members of the Sternritter return since we didn't know anything about what happened to them after death. But nowadays, we know that isn't possible, as Kubo confirmed fairly recently, in fact, that Quincy go somewhere completely different to everyone else when they die. So I figured 4 years on, knowing what we do now, why not take another, more up-to-date, better educated stab at which deceased Bleach characters might be lurking in the depths of hell itself, might just be waiting to be set free in the wake of the events of the Hell chapter. Make sure to let me know down in the comments who you'd most like to see return in a potential Hell arc, and of course whether or not you agree with my list. Remember, of course, to hit subscribe down below if you enjoyed today's video, guys. It really does help support the channel. Maybe you're new here, or maybe you're a long-time viewer who just hasn't hit that button. Well, it's free and very easy to do, and believe it or not, it does make a massive difference. But either way, your support is greatly appreciated. Now, before we begin the list, we do have some housekeeping to go over first, as is necessary when discussing the topic of hell. Remember, there are 2 conditions for a character to end up in hell, and they depend solely on what race said character is. For a Shinigami, the character needs to have a spirit class of 3 or above, a concept revealed in the Hell chapter by Kyoraku, who explained that only Captain class Shinigami fit into that category. And then said character needs to have been accidentally committed to hell as a part of the Konso Reisai ceremony following a character's death, which is performed to prevent their extraordinarily dense reishi from lingering above ground, as unlike with any Shinigami of a spirit class of 4 and below, whose reishi can just return to the soil of the Soul Society naturally, that isn't the case with those of spirit class of 3 or above. It will just linger indefinitely. The notion of a character having a spirit class of 3 or above is critical, though things are made a little trickier by the fact that the term Captain Class has essentially lost all meaning these days. In fact, I have a Vice Captain on this very list for us to debate over. And then when it comes to hollows, things are totally different again. Any hollow can end up in hell regardless of their power, because they aren't committed the same way. A hollow ending up in hell is a direct result of them being purified by a Zanpakuto, and essentially judged. If said hollow's main soul, the dominant soul that emerged during the process of the hollow becoming a Menos, committed evil deeds while a living human, then that hollow will be sent to hell upon purification. And that counts for even the smallest, most worthless hollows as well. Now, here's where things get a little weird. We saw that Shrieker, still to date the only character to be sent to hell on screen, was dragged into hell immediately upon his defeat, pretty much as soon as Ichigo's Zanpakuto cleaved him in two. And yet this doesn't happen to a single other hollow, Arrancar, Espada, whatever, throughout the course of the entire manga, despite many of them being killed on screen. And yet, with Xyloporo appearing in the Hell chapter as a jailer of Hell, we know he was clearly dragged there too after his death at the hands of Mayuri. So maybe it simply takes longer for an Arankar of Espada class to find themselves being pulled into hell. Either way, we can't discount the Espada simply because we didn't see it happen. We didn't see it happen to any of them, and yet any of them could be there. Well, okay, not quite any of them. While technically any Arankar, Fracción, Espada, Numeros, or otherwise, could be in hell, there are a couple of prominent characters who I think it is pretty clear-cut likely haven't made it. The second Espada, Barragan Louisenbahn, wasn't purified by Azan Pakto at all, but was in fact killed by his own power, Respirar. This likely means that he didn't enter the cycle of rebirth at all, and was instead just kind of aged out of existence entirely. His entire soul was reduced to dust and then some, and that was basically it for the King of Waco Mundo, which is a shame as I'd love to see him again. And as much as people don't want to hear it, there's also Ulquiorra. This is definitely a tougher one, but while Ulquiorra sustained a serious injury at the hands of Ichigo's Tensa Zangetsu, that wasn't what killed him. No, it was the fact that the entire bottom half of his body was then subsequently blown away by a Cero that eventually did him in, and we see him fade into nothingness as a result of his body completely shutting down. So, unfortunately, as unpopular as it may be, I also don't think there's any chance for Ulquiorra to have made it to hell. Having been finished off by a Cero, he, like Barragan, was not purified by Azan Pakto, and likely didn't enter the cycle at all. And, like I mentioned earlier, we now know that there aren't going to be any Sternritter, or any Quincy for that matter, in hell either, regardless of power, because apparently they just don't work like that. Which afterlife do they end up in? Well, we've still got no idea. Anyway, that's enough of the housekeeping, let's get on with the actual list. Before we crack on with this list, however, consider checking out my other channel, Mr. Tomo Talks Games. We are growing fairly nicely over there, and a lot of that is down to your incredible support. It really does mean the absolute world to me, and it is making a massive difference, as you can see for yourself. If you haven't yet checked it out, if you don't even know that I have this other channel, consider having a look now. The link is in the description. If you like what you see there, consider hitting subscribe. Again, it really would make a huge difference, and it would be greatly appreciated too. In regards to an honourable mention, well, I think it makes sense to highlight the characters who we know are definitively currently spending their days in hell. Of course, Shrieker is there, having been the only character to date to have been pulled through the gates of hell in the manga right before our eyes. Then there's the former 8th Espada Xyloporo Grans, who has taken on a totally new appearance as a jailer of hell, having been sent there after his death in the Rankar arc. Finally, we have the three captains, Yamamoto, Unohana, and Ukitake, all of whom are currently languishing in hell as of the Hell chapter, having been sent there accidentally as a result of the Konso Reisai ceremony that took place many years following their deaths in the Thousand Year Blood War arc. Ukitake's Sogyo no Kotoari was even seen impaling Xyloporo and forcibly dragging him back through the gates of hell in that very Hell chapter, only now the Zanpakuto was enormously oversized. So, with the honourable mentions out of the way as well, let's get down to business. Up first is a definite fan favourite, and a character that people would love to see again: the former captain of the 3rd Division, Gin Ichimaru. After Gin's attempt to assassinate Aizen backfired spectacularly, resulting in his grisly death at the hands of a newly transformed transcendent being, Gin passed away, leaving Ichigo to finish the job in his stead. Despite Gin's status as a traitor in the eyes of the Gotei 13, it seems likely that they still would have performed the Konso Reisai ritual, as his Reishi was clearly at least Spirit Class 3, and the Soul Society can't simply leave it lingering around and causing problems forevermore. So yeah, it seems highly likely to me that Gin was sent to hell after his death in the Irankar arc, and it's likely again, due to his status, that no one, aside from the likes of Rangiku and Izuru of course, gave his passing much thought, and likely didn't notice anything out of the ordinary. Moving on, the former 9th Espada Aranero Ararueri is an interesting one, in that he's already been shown to have gone to hell. As part of a tie-in promotion with the 4th Bleach movie, Kubo wrote and drew a manga chapter showing both Aranero and Xyloporo finding themselves in hell before being defeated by the movie's villain Shuren and his minions. Now, that movie isn't canon, and so it stands to reason that neither is the tie-in material accompanying it, especially since it depicts the movie's version of hell, which I have to imagine is going to be completely different from whatever Kubo has in mind, especially since Kubo has noted before that he isn't really a huge fan of that movie in general. Despite that though, Kubo did have presumably free reign to choose the characters who ended up in hell, and considering Xyloporo later returned in the actual canon hell chapter, it stands to reason, at least in my opinion, that Kubo still believes Aronniero was evil in life as well, evil enough to end up in hell, and that he too would go there. So I wouldn't be surprised at all to see him there. Up next is the character in question that kickstarted this entire video, and that's the 5th Espada Neutra Gilga. Again, it seems fair to imagine which Espada would end up in hell based on their personalities as Arankar. Neutra is malicious, treacherous, envious, violent, sexist, and more, and it's hard to imagine these traits not being present in who he once was, even if they have maybe been amplified as a result of him becoming a Hollow, because it seems likely to me they would have helped shape his journey as a Hollow too. Now, to be fair, it's impossible to know for sure just how evil Neutra really was as a human, and it's hard to know as well what kinds of evil acts one has to commit as a human to find themselves going to hell as a Hollow. The rules are essentially undefined. All we know is that Shrieker was a serial killer, and unsurprisingly that was enough to earn him a trip to hell. But I think Neutra makes a lot of sense narratively too. Xyloporo's appearance in the Hell chapter, while cool, don't get me wrong, it was awesome, it was almost expected though as well in some ways, due to him appearing in that previous tie-in chapter, and yet he and Neutra often feel like a package duo to me. They're both monstrous people for different reasons, and they are both prevalent villains at the same time. They have a history together, which is rare for the Espada, and I think Neutra's return in the Hell arc would go over really well with fans. And then up next is the former 10th or 0 Espada Yamilago, who's really on here for very similar reasons to Neutra, although to be honest, he is perhaps even worse. As an Arankar, Yami is savagely brutal, murderous, callous, unrelentingly violent, and a total monster. In fact, of the Espada, really none of them have a penchant for wanton destruction and unfettered killing like Yami, who won't hesitate to turn his fists on even his own kind for seemingly no reason whatsoever, and it is hard to believe that this isn't who he was as a human. Sure, someone like Grimjo might come close, but where Grimjo clearly does have a code of sorts, bastardized as though it might be, Yami relishes in seemingly random death, going so far as to kill hundreds of innocent people on a whim from the moment he arrives in Karakura Town, and he takes genuine pleasure in going after Ichigo's friends in as gratuitous a way as possible. Yami seemed to be designed to be a thuggish, two-dimensional villain with no redeeming qualities or features whatsoever, and if that doesn't scream going to hell after his death at the hands of Byakuya and Kenpachi, then I don't know what does. The only thing that I think would genuinely prevent Yami from appearing in the Hell arc is his lack of popularity, but considering Kubo already showed Aranniero going to hell, well, I'd like to think that that's not really a consideration. And so, as we reach roughly the halfway point of this list, you're probably wondering where the former first Espada, Coyote Stark, is, and, well, yeah, I'd love to see him return too. And look, most things work in his favour. He was cut down by Kyoraku's Katen Kyokotsu, meaning his soul was purified by a Shinigami in the end. It's a pretty clear-cut example of the fact. And we of course don't know what happened to him afterwards. So, could Stark be in hell? Yeah, technically, if he was evil in his human life. The main issue for me where Stark is concerned is that I have a really hard time believing his original soul was evil, considering whoever they were became the being that split into Stark and Lilinet, and did so out of pure loneliness. Not a desire for power, nothing like that. I really can't see them being evil enough to go to hell, but I mean, I could be wrong. In almost every sense of the word, Stark and Lilinet have defied what it means to be a Hollow. And that's what really makes them stand out from the rest. They stand apart from their contemporaries. In their compassion, in their friendship, in their desire for camaraderie. Something virtually every other Espada doesn't wish for, due to their nature. The nature of Hollows is animalistic. Many of them are insane, power-hungry, and will put themselves first above all others, always. But Stark and Lilinet were always different, and that must bleed back through to the source. Still, I hold my hands up, I would love to see him again, but I do have a hard time believing it. Alright, that's enough Arrancar for now. Continuing on, there's potentially an entire lineage worth of deceased Kenpachi who could reappear in Hell that goes way beyond simply Unohana herself. The two deceased Kenpachi that we know of are the 7th Kenpachi Kurayashiki and the 10th Kenpachi Kiganjo, and both of them could quite feasibly be in Hell. There's really no reason why not. Kurayashiki, who appeared in the light novel Spirits Are Forever With You, was killed by his successor Soya Azashiro, while Kiganjo, who appeared briefly in the Thousand Year Blood War arc, was struck down in a single hit by Zaraki, who would go on to become the current-day Kenpachi. But honestly, it would be really cool to see these characters in action. Imagine a scenario in the Hell arc where Unohana now commands the hell-bound Kenpachi, and Zaraki and the 11th Division are forced to face them. I mean, that sounds pretty awesome to me. Moving on, similarly to Gin before him, it seems likely to me that the previous captain of the 9th Division, Kaname Tosen, should also be in Hell after his death in the Arrancar arc. Though the circumstances are a little weirder surrounding his fate after he was blown to pieces by Aizen in a gruesome shower of blood. That being said, as mentioned before, the way a Shinigami finds themselves in Hell differs greatly from that of a Hollow. Tosen doesn't need to have been killed by a Zanpakuto like they do, and it goes even further than that. In the case of Yamamoto, whose entire corpse was eradicated, it was atomized by Yhwach arrows, it seems as though there doesn't actually need to be a body when performing the Konso Reisai ritual for it to work. So long as, I assume, traces of the deceased character's reishi remains, the ritual can be performed. And then presumably that soul is reconstituted in Hell? To be honest, Yamamoto's soul surviving obliteration by a powerful Quincy's arrows is really weird. You would think that would have destroyed his soul completely and removed it from the cycle of rebirth, but in a sense, him going to Hell has seemingly given his soul an out. It has seemingly saved it and spared it from annihilation, even though it's, something like 12 years later when they perform the ceremony? So that is really weird, but to get back on track, what I'm getting at is, even though his body was destroyed, Tosen should still be able to go to Hell as part of the ceremony, so I would absolutely expect to see him. I do wonder though as well what it means for a true Shinigami and Hollow hybrid to be purified by a Zanpakuto. Presumably Tosen still falls firmly in the Shinigami camp, though I mean, he does have a resurrection, so yeah, things do get a little bit weird. Alright, but moving on to our final three, and this is perhaps the most contentious of the bunch, the one that maybe doesn't make sense, but I think is worth including. And that's the former vice captain of the 1st Division, Chojuro Sasakibe, who was of course the first casualty of the Thousand Year Blood War arc. Now, ironically, prior to his death, I would have never imagined Sasakibe having a spirit class of 3 or above, but, well, here we are, times have changed. Kyoraku mentions in the Hell chapter that vice captains tend to have a spirit class of 4 or 5, meaning their reishi can freely return to the Soul Society's soil of its own accord. But surely there are exceptions. This can't be a hard and fast rule. The spirit class scale must be fluid, or else it just doesn't make sense. There's no way Renji, in his current state, doesn't have a spirit class of 3 or higher, and the same goes for Rukia. Since she's promoted from vice captain to captain, I mean, what does that mean for her spirit class? Unless your spirit class isn't really affected by how outright powerful you are. That could be a possibility, I guess. Spirit class is defined as the density of spirit pressure found within the subject's reishi. So maybe that is literally something defined from birth. But it is weird, because if that isn't the case, and spirit class can change depending on the power level of the character, what would Rukia going from vice captain to captain really mean? Does her spirit class magically go up a tier? Or is there a way of identifying a Shinigami's spirit class long beforehand? What I mean is, would they have known that Rukia's spirit class was already above 3 prior to her being promoted? If a vice captain's spirit class was still 4, would they not promote them, perhaps? How much does spirit class really play into the kind of internal backdoor politicking of who becomes a captain, I guess is the question I'm asking. Anyway, speaking of Sasakibe, considering how powerful and ancient it turned out he really was, considering he had a bankai for centuries, all of that, I have a hard time believing that his spirit class wasn't at least 3. The real question is, would they have performed the Konso Reisai for him? We know his spirit body was cremated, but does someone, presumably Mayuri, perform a check on the deceased's reishi to determine their spirit class, and then they go from there? So, if after Sasakibe's death, Mayuri performed a check on him and was like, oh, Sasakibe's spirit class is now 3, that's when they would use the Konso Reisai ceremony. The Konso Reisai doesn't occur for many years after the character's death for some reason. That always felt a bit contrived to me, as if Kubo was like, oh, I had a time skip at the end of the Thousand Year Blood War arc and I want the Hell arc to take place after this, so we're going to have to just say the Konso Reisai doesn't take place until now anyway. So I think Sasakibe could be one of a few vice captains to make the cut. Plus, it would be kind of awesome to see a demonic, shackled Sasakibe continuing to serve alongside his hellish master. Next up, our penultimate pick is a character that we actually discussed quite recently, and one who people tend to forget about. And that's the former captain of the 6th Division and former head of one of the most powerful noble houses of the Soul Society, Ginrei Kuchiki. Look, it seems pretty likely that poor old Ginrei is dead by now, even though no one has said as such. Again, how age works within the Soul Society is really just an unknowable mystery at this point, but Ginrei is no longer a captain and hasn't been seen for over 100 years basically at this point. Maybe he's living out his days in the Kuchiki clan palace, but that just doesn't seem likely to me. For starters, there's supposedly no retirement from the Gotei 13. It is a military position that you earn and commit to for life. And secondly, as the leader of such an influential house and a top-ranking Shinigami within the military hierarchy, it just doesn't seem likely to me that Ginrei would even want to step down. And considering how old some of his contemporaries were, the likes of Yamamoto and Unohana, for example, again, I just have a hard time believing age is really a factor here either. So the logical conclusion is that Ginrei died at some point. And so yeah, if he has in fact died, it would be awesome to see him in hell. There's no doubt they would perform the Konso Reisai ceremony for him, and what a perfect opportunity to not only show off what he can do, but maybe have both Byakuya and Rukia, or just Byakuya alone, face him in the ultimate battle for the honour of the Kuchiki house. And so yeah, with the potential Hell arc, and its current setup as has been created within the Hell chapter, there does seem to be a lot of potential for full circle storylines like that to come to fruition. And as I mentioned earlier, Kenpachi could take on the deceased previous holders of that title, and maybe Kyoraku could, after saving Ukitake, take on alongside him Yamamoto once more. The possibilities are endless, and they only get better when you consider my final pick on this list, which I'll admit is cheating a little, but of course it had to be none other than the captains of the original Gotei 13. And guess what? The last time I made this video, they were the top pick there as well, but the difference was we had no idea who these characters even were. Isn't that kind of crazy? They were simply a mysterious, shadowy lineup of silhouettes from chapter 511, that same lineup that we had pored over for years at that point. Well, thanks to Kubo, back in 2022 or very early 2023, thanks as well to the Thousand Year Blood War Arc anime, we now know who these guys are. From Chikashi Hoin and Saito Furufushi, to Nobutsuna Shigyo, Chigiri Shijima, Saizo Sakahone, and more. These characters now all have names, they all have faces, and I couldn't be more excited to discover, well, anything else about them. And let's face it, the community has already made up its mind. The captains of the original Gotei 13 are the absolute perfect choice to be the villains of the Hell arc. They all come complete with an already established power set. They all have brand new unseen Shikai and Bankai to reveal, which would be so very exciting. They all have a history with the Gotei 13 itself. They were already all once described as the most powerful iteration of the Gotei 13, and again, talk about coming full circle. The ultimate history of the Gotei 13 clashing with the force of its present-day self sounds like an incredible way to continue the story, both physically and ideologically. Aside from Yamamoto and Unohana, both of whom survived until the Thousand Year Blood War arc, it definitely seems like every other captain is long dead, and so they are all ready and waiting for the gates of hell to be broken open at last. And I, for one, am really hoping this is the route Kubo goes down. The conspiracy theorist in me also can't help but wonder if that's the ulterior reason for actually going so far as to reveal every single one of them in detail for the Thousand Year Blood War arc anime, if perhaps Kubo is maybe setting things into motion for what's still to come. Their appearance in the Hell arc would be more impactful as a result of us now already knowing who they are. Well, I'm getting ahead of myself, but ultimately you never know. All I know is the original Gotei 13, the captains who trounced the Yhwach and dismantled the Lichtreich 1,000 years ago, these sadistic, bloodthirsty killers who were defenders in name only, would be right at home at Hell. And thanks to their incredible strength and their seemingly sinister nature, would make for the perfect villains for the arc as well. Alright everyone, but that's it for today's video. As always, I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you took something of value away from it as well. Thanks to what we now know, all these years later, this turned out to be a pretty different video, a pretty different list to that one we made previously back in 2021. But still, I'd love to get your thoughts on this new list as well, this new, more up-to-date, better educated list. The one that did come about because of everything we now know. I'd love to hear your thoughts on how likely it is, how realistic it is that these characters could make a reappearance, and of these characters, who would you like to see the absolute most? And is there anyone that didn't make the list that you'd also love to see as well? I'd love to get your thoughts down in the comments below. Perhaps you are a believer that Ulquiorra can come back, that he can make it to Hell despite not being purified by a Zanpakuto. Whatever your reasoning, do please let me know down in the comments. Alright everyone, once again, thank you so very much for watching. Consider hitting subscribe if you haven't done already. Check out my other channel, Mr. Tomo Talks Games. And as always, a huge thank you goes out to my wonderful supporters over on Patreon, who I really couldn't keep doing this without. Your support does mean the absolute world. It makes a gigantic difference. It just means so very much to me that you would support my channel over on Patreon. Again, it is absolutely amazing, and it does mean so very much. So if you want to support me over on Patreon as well, you can do just that at the link in the description. But until next time, guys, thank you all once again so very much for watching. I'll catch you later, and I'll see you then.